Hello, and welcome to Realign Journey, the unfiltered guide to self-discovery and reconnection. I'm Sierra Sambrowski, your host, and together we'll deep dive the topics that have caused us to lose touch with ourselves and explore ways to reconnect to our true self. This week, I am joined by Joy Stone. Joy is a dynamic spiritual mentor and anxiety coach. She's certified in yoga psychology and positive psychology, and the best-selling author of If I'm So Spiritual, Why Am I Still So Anxious? Joy has mentored hundreds of women to heal, align, and elevate their soul's journey from the inside out. Her mission is to help women who have tried everything else finally find freedom from anxiety, rediscover who they really are, and let go of the fear that anything is missing. Hi, Joy.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to have you.
I'm so happy to be here.
We, as I do with most people that I have on the show, we've had a chance to talk a little bit. So we kind of know some things about each other. And one of the things, and where I'd really like to start today, one of the things that struck me the most is that you made the comment about anxiety is a messenger and not a problem that we have to overcome. And I think that is just absolute gold because I think everyone thinks of anxiety as something they need to get over, as some kind, there's a lot of self-judgment, a lot of self-criticism around having anxiety. So the
Mhm.
idea of using it as a messenger is fabulous to me. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, that is really when I came to that realization for myself that anxiety is a messenger. It came after years of battling my own mind and feeling like with all the work I had already done on myself, with
Mhm.
all the spiritual quote unquote tools, the yoga, the meditation, the breathing, the therapy, all the things I had done, that I had this question, which is, why am I still feeling this way? What is happening? And there was a moment that I had in 2012 where I hit like this bottom, which became an amazing breakthrough, where I had this download during this breakdown, which is that anxiety is showing me where I am in relationship to myself. So, in that way, anxiety is a messenger. And that if I am constantly trying to quiet the messenger by treating, which I call anxiety really is the symptom of that
Mhm.
greater diagnosis, which is that we are unaware of who we really are. So if I continue to just treat the symptoms and try to quiet the messenger, which is the anxiety, with all of these tools and not capture the message, I'm never really gonna heal. I'm never really gonna feel that wholeness because all of my attention and all of my energy was on treating the anxiety,
Mhm.
not getting to know who I really am or
Mhm.
building in my confidence or stepping into or leaning into my unique freedom and peace. So it was like a shift in my awareness and my relationship to the anxiety. So again,
Mhm.
anxiety was showing me, and it continues to show me where I am in relationship to myself. So it's a matter of alignment, not of problem. I can continually try to fix a problem, but if I continually come at it with the idea that I'm broken or something's wrong with me, I'm still out of alignment with myself. Right. So
Mhm.
when the anxiety flares up really high or even a little bit, it's showing me where my focus is. And when my focus is on something that I think I need to feel better, whether it's someone's approval, right? Whether it's trying to make sure no one knows that I think I'm not worthy, quote unquote, whatever might be flaring up. When
Mhm.
my focus goes on that, simultaneously, my focus moves away from the truth of who I am, that inner self,
Mhm.
right? So we can unpack this
Mhm.
more, but that was the real kind of shift. I thought, oh my gosh, I've been spending all these years trying to manage and fix and control the anxiety and not really getting to know my own power, my own truth, my
Yeah.
essence. Yeah.
Yeah, and who you really were created divinely to be. Because I
Right.
think that's where all of that usually falls down is that we start thinking of ourselves as less than we actually are, less powerful than we actually are, less lovable than we actually are, whatever that looks like for you, right? In the different aspects, because it can show up and look differently for each person. But I think that's so incredibly powerful because people are taking lots of medication.
Mhm.
Not that I judge that at all. I think there's always a time and place for it until you can do the work and get to the root of things, right? But I certainly know people that have debilitating anxiety. Um, and so I don't know where they would be without it. What do you think is and it's interesting too, because I actually read something the other day about how we shouldn't always be pushing everybody to meditate either, because
Yeah.
particularly if they have trauma or anxiety, that
Yeah.
closing your eyes and sitting in a room can be really triggering, right?
Yes. Yes, it was for me. Very much so.
Was it?
Yes.
Do you
I
want to
couldn't
talk
do it.
about that a little?
Yeah, because when you have anxiety, and anxiety, if there's different kinds of anxiety, right? But if we have
Sure.
anxiety that's rooted in a trauma, for example, which
Mhm.
mine certainly was, um, we have learned to avoid really at all costs. I don't want to say we, our essence, but our mind out of
Mhm.
safety, that survival mode has learned to move away from present moment and to try to like scan our environment, to scan, our life for possible danger.
Mhm.
So
Right.
we've learned to not be in present moment, and present moment feels very, very uncomfortable for us because we haven't really practiced or learned how to be in present moment because present moment didn't feel safe. So to sit and try to meditate without understanding the bigger picture of why I'm doing that at all, understanding that it's not about stopping the mind, it's about actually learning to have self compassion. It's about actually learning to observe something without judgment. Like the meditation, if I'm just told to sit quietly and just like try to stop my mind or quiet my mind or come back to the present moment, that felt very, very, very triggering and very confrontational because I was doing my whole body, my whole energy system, my whole nervous system was trying to push away from present moment. So I
Mhm.
just agree that it absolutely can be. And so it isn't for me, the spiritual practices are like little mirrors that I'm using to show me how to be in a better relationship with myself. So it's
Mhm.
not going to be cookie cutter. It's not going to look the same for each of us,
Right.
right? It's not a one size fits all. It's not one meditation. And there's stages that we can go to. So, for example, with meditation in the yoga psychology that I study, there's really levels of meditation, right? And the very first phase of meditation is what yoga calls pratyahara,
Mhm.
which is simply learning to focus. So many of us are not even able to focus our mind. Our mind is running us because the anxiety, when we are out of the place of trauma, right? If we're not in that traumatic experience anymore, but our nervous system still believes we are when it gets
Mhm.
triggered.
Mhm.
If we're not in that state, 99% of our anxieties are created by our imagination.
Mhm.
So our
Sure.
mind is running us. So whether we're comfortable with meditation or not, we have to learn to take back control of our mind by being in that deeper seat of awareness, knowing that we're not the mind. So what pratyahara is simply in English is focus. So can I sit and look at a candle and notice when my mind starts wandering, just bring it back to the candle? Or can I read a book, start it and finish it? Can I read one page and notice when my mind goes off? Can I bring it back to what I'm reading? It doesn't have to be confrontational where I'm sitting in a room on a cushion completely still. It can be, can I drink my water and really notice that I'm drinking my water? So it's learning to focus the mind and bring it back because
Mm.
the mind, again, is in a habit.
Mhm.
And all anxiety really is a pattern. It's a pattern in our physiology, our psychology, and we can change that. We can change patterns, but we have to start
Mhm.
with focus. So for me, that's how I got through that. Instead of having to go right to meditation and being in the Zen state, which I could not be in at the time. It was, can I focus? Can I do something and give it my attention and hold it there for a moment?
Joy, this is so good. I feel like there are people that are going to be listening to this. They're going to be like, that just changed my world. Because I know even somebody, as somebody that has done meditation, so I'm pretty comfortable with it. And I always am like trying to explain to people or break down to people other ways that they can do it. I'm always saying, like, you don't just sit on the floor on a pillow and, be cross-legged and all that, right? It can be walking and can be, but I love the idea of just starting with simple focus, like you said. And I've heard the candle thing before, but even like the reading of the page, I think that's huge, because I think I understand further down my path how that really is such a starting point
Yeah.
for getting that clarity and getting that stillness, and to get yourself to be comfortable in the present moment. And yet I've not heard anybody say that. So that's huge, I
Oh,
think.
I mean, I'm glad, because it was so huge for me too. And I'm glad it's going to reach more people and hopefully it resonates. The thing I'll say about that too is, to make it even easier to take it a step further, is we are already doing this. So when I started to tell myself, okay, if I can practice this pratyahara, if I can just commit to practicing the focus, I'm also reminding myself I'm already doing this. So what I'm asking you or me to learn to do is, we're already doing it. It's just I'm focused in on the negative thought, the worrisome thought, the fear-based thought. I already know how to focus on something and hold my attention to it. That's what anxiety is. We're focusing on something and our attention stays stuck on that. And then we experience the effect of what we're focused on. So when we also pick something to focus on and practice, it's good to focus on something that invokes qualities of calm or peace or confidence, because we're doing it all the time.
Yeah, oh gosh, I think that's so great to hear too, because I think, so much, and what really kind of feeds the beast on that anxiety, on that stress, on the unrest, on the disconnect from ourselves, however we want to describe that, because I think ultimately all those things are the same. But is to remember that we are already doing these things. We're just doing it in a less than healthy, a less helpful manner.
Yep. That's it.
I mean, I know you probably more than I do, but certainly in my travels in life, I hear people say all the time, well, I can't meditate. Well, I can't do that.
Right. Yeah.
And
And
that self-judgment, that self-criticism, saying I can't do this, only like feeds that beast.
right. It's like, and once we tell our brain we can't do something, our brain stops looking for a way to do it. And that's really important for us to know. So if I say I can't do this, well, then our brain is like, okay, we can't do this. So now let's figure out how to, like, stress out and be anxious because we can't do something. So,
Yeah.
and the other thing too, like in alignment with that, meditation or any of these mental practices that we have, or emotional practices, even like visualization. I remember when I was working with my spiritual teacher early on, I would say, I can't visualize. I can't visualize because I can't see things in my mind like that. And she would say, you are always visualizing. You can't not visualize. We are always thinking about scenarios and visualizing how maybe our day is going to go, or what it's going to be like if we walk in a room. I used to visualize, if I walk in a room, what if no one talks to me? What if no one talks to me? Oh my gosh, I'm going to feel so stressed out. I'm going to feel so anxious. I'm going to feel so weird. That's a visualization, because I was thinking it before it happened, and I was feeling it with my whole body. I was already feeling the anxiety and the stress, versus training myself to think about walking in that room differently is all I'm doing. I already know how to visualize. And that was also huge, because these are not like rocket science things, right? But we put them in these terms of these big practices we have to master. It's like, no, you already are a master of these practices. It's just shifting the lane you're driving down. It's like, am I going to drive down this lane of fear or this lane of faith? And I had to make that decision in my life. And that's what I mean. Anxiety was showing me I'm driving down this lane of fear. And that's okay. There's no judgment. But I now know that, and I can start to practice driving down this lane of faith using the same tools I've been using to create the anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great analogy because it's like you already know how to drive. We're not asking you to learn how to drive.
Right.
You already know. Like you said, you're just going down a different road. You're just using a different lane.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Exactly.
think that's so I hope people really let that like soak into them. I hope because I think that can be a really empowering way to start to shift the way you're looking at things, the way you're looking at yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was gonna say, certainly that actually makes me think about that I think there's a lot of people using the term anxiety, and I think it can be caught up in sort of a victim mentality sort of way that we're stuck in this anxiety, and there's a lot of because we got comfortable with saying I'm anxious
Right.
culturally, and so
Mhm.
then it became like the thing, well, I suffer from anxiety. So now there's a lot of you, but talk to us a little bit about some of the ways that anxiety shows up that people don't call it anxiety because there's still plenty of
Yes.
baby boomers and Gen Xers, those that are a little bit older. Probably we still have a lot more hesitation around self-proclaiming weaknesses or things that we perceive as a weakness, you
Yes.
know? And so I think there's a lot of people that have some form of what is truly probably clinically anxiety, but they don't recognize it as that because it's not the way that we've kind of been we're shown this face of what anxiety looks like now. So
Yeah.
do you want to talk about some of the other ways, the expressions that are really anxiety at root?
Yeah. I think that's a great question because actually this comes up for me a lot in my work. And you and I have talked about this is that
Mhm.
word anxiety. I know not everyone's going to relate to, but they might still be dealing with and not realize it because
Right.
anxiety for me from the outside, if you looked at me, even when I was in the depths of my anxiety, you would not know I had anxiety. I was high functioning. I looked like I had it all together. It's not about like this messy life that we have, or we look like we can't handle life. Anxiety shows up as the need for like to control everything. So do you feel like you have to control the way people are perceiving you?
Mm.
Do you feel like you are having to control your partner and the way people are perceiving your partner? This is one way that it showed up for me was like I would go out with my husband and if he said something which I perceived as weird or like, "Oh my gosh, what are people going to think you just said that?" Now, this isn't like clinical anxiety, but this is anxiety, it's anxiousness, it's hyper vigilant vigilance. It's like I am now placing my value as a person or what people think about me based on what my husband is doing.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it shows up as hypervigilance. What are people thinking about me? Are people talking about me? Replaying scenarios in your head over and over again. Maybe you're heading home from a party. This is another example. I'm just giving real tangibles.
Mm-hmm.
With my husband, we would be
Tangibles
driving
are great.
home and I would say, "Why do you think so and so didn't talk to us? Did you notice that so and so didn't really like ask us any questions about X, Y, or Z?" And my husband would be like, "No, I didn't notice that at all. They seemed really happy to see us." And over here, I'm having this completely different anxious experience of overthinking, hypercritical, what's happening? And that is anxiety is a deep form of negative thinking.
Mm.
Anxiety is rooted in negative thinking. It's seeing the world through a negative fear-based lens. So if you notice yourself being hypercritical, hypervigilant, comparing yourself to others, mind reading what other people are doing or thinking about you, that might be some anxiousness. If you're stopping yourself in your business, in your life, from getting out there and trying something new, from taking a risk, you might have some anxiousness, some
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. And what um it can feel like you're out of alignment with yourself in life, right? That can also feel that can be anxiousness. So it doesn't actually like anxiety, I know I've worked with different people who like there's different levels of anxiety where they can't even leave their house because they have such high level
Mm-hmm.
anxiety or they
Mm-hmm.
have social anxiety where they can't function in social situations. So there's those types of things too. There's PTSD, there's all kinds of anxieties, phobias, but we're talking about mostly everyday sort of anxieties that are stopping us from living our fullest life.
Yeah.
And that shows up in many ways.
Yeah. I know too that in some people that I know intimately, even for myself, um, one of the ways that I recognize, oh, you must be feeling a little anxious today for some reason or around this situation is I get what I call crunchy. Where, you're like a little too snappy and things seem to irritate you a little too much, or you're not your best self. You're
Yeah.
not, I'm
Yeah.
really not my best self for sure. But I'll realize that if I'm feeling, like I said, a little too impatient, a little, like I said, less tolerant of things that normally would never bother me, for me personally, that's always like my little warning flag that, hey, you must be feeling anxious about something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Because if you look through kind of the biomedical lens of anxiety, right? And that's one view and it's perfectly fine. It's helpful. It's just not the whole picture, right? If you look
Mm-hmm.
through the biomedical lens, they'll be like, well, you worry a lot or you're stressed out or you're overwhelmed. So you probably have anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have anxiety. So therefore you are worried all the time, right? Like you have anxiety. So therefore you overthink things, right? But really, through the spiritual lens, anxiety is the symptom, it's not the diagnosis,
Right.
right? So it's like, actually, oh, you're in the habit of thinking negatively. Your mind's conjuring up like this idea that you need to have everything in place for you to feel secure. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
your mind's believing that you need everybody to like you or agree with you for you to be able to make a move in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So our mind, so really it's like, therefore you're anxious. So if you look at it through the spiritual lens, anxiety is the symptom. If you look at it through the biomedical lens, anxiety is the diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So those are going to be two very different paths of treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Both can complement each other. They don't have to be, separate.
Right.
Because I know I walked the line of also doing the Western with therapy and I was on medication early on in my journey, which, like you said, did help me to stabilize the mind when I was unable to stabilize it
Yeah.
myself,
Mm-hmm.
to do the deeper work. But then it wasn't needed for me for long-term solution. And I think this is where people get stuck, where it doesn't need to be long-term solution. It can be that short-term solution.
Right.
The medicine for most of us is actually not meant to be long-term because the most of us have what's kind of like a household cold variety of anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not
Right.
this deep, deep clinical where we need medication type of anxiety.
Right. Yeah, you're going through maybe a multiple of stressors at the same time, but
Yeah.
they are like just temporary circumstances of life. Even if it feels like you've been stuck in it for the last 4 years,
Yeah.
they are temporary. And then, like you said, I think that's a really excellent way to kind of try and help someone define it. Was it like an outside circumstance that's giving you this extra pressure right now?
Mm.
Or is it something that you just can never shake? Like you could have everything going right forever and ever, and you still feel this constant sort of fear or dread around life and what the day is going to bring.
Yeah. And it's all going to be in how you perceive things too, right? So as we start to shift our perception, which I know you and I have
Mm-hmm.
talked about, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
what seems like an outside pressure right now, by the way, is really important for us to acknowledge is not going to be an outside pressure for everyone.
Right.
And that's why I often talk about that everything in life is neutral. Now, it took me a long time to come to understand this for myself, but everything in life is neutral, meaning it's not going to be experienced the same way by any two people. So I don't mean it has like no meaning. It's not like, oh, this is just neutral that someone passed away in my life, or this is just neutral that I lost my job, or whatever might be happening.
Mm-hmm.
But it means that there are 7 billion ways to experience the same thing. And if I'm in the habit of experiencing it as some kind of pressure that I can't handle, which is what my anxious mind was in the habit of telling myself,
Mm-hmm.
then there's always going to be the next pressure. Life's going to
Mm-hmm.
continue to evolve and change and push back on us because that's the way life is. It's just in flux and flow.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can change my inner landscape and start to change and clean what I call your belief window, which is this lens that we look through,
Mm-hmm.
and start to expect different things for myself. And the key thing to really recognize is A, everything is neutral, and B, the power that I'm actually seeking in trying to manage and control the outer circumstances is something that I have to know originates inside of me, not out there.
Mm.
So spiritual psychology is not denying that life can be painful or that life can be uncertain. It's just not agreeing that our power exists in that.
Mm-hmm.
It exists within us. And the way that we're going to access that power is by cleaning the way, I call it your belief window,
Mm-hmm.
cleaning up the window that we're seeing through so that we see the world differently. But not only that, because that's where most modalities stop, is we have to also see ourselves differently.
Mm-hmm.
We have to see ourselves as the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can have 1,000 tools in your toolbox, but if you don't know that you are the solution and that you are the problem, you're going to keep looking for the next tool or be mad that this tool isn't working.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. Because I think you're exactly right. I think there's a lot of people that do just the first part, work on the patterning, sort of the general mindset stuff, trying to switch and like, using the mantras and all this other stuff, right? The all the tools that help us interrupt or help us to refocus, as we already were talking about. And then they go, these tools are shit. None of this works.
Right.
I've been doing this for 6 months and nothing's really getting better. Nothing's really, because now you're still shifting and putting the power in the tools now.
Yep. That's it. You're putting the power in the tools
instead of the outside circumstance, which is better.
Yeah.
But you're still not saying the power of the tool to work is in me. It's on me and in me.
Yes, exactly. Or I have exactly. That's it. That I hear that all the time. And that's where I was. That's when I hit that bottom in 2012. It was like, wait a minute. Okay, I have more tools than most people I know at this point. I'm a yoga teacher, 10 years. I've studied positive psychology, yoga psychology, spirituality. I've traveled with my teacher. I have so many mentors. What is happening? And also the women that I work with will come to me like, well, we'll get through something, or we have these epiphanies, or we're having these inner rearrangements. The women are having these experiences, and then something in their life happens, and they're like, wait, now I feel bad again. Wait, now it's not working. Now I'm having this. I don't feel good. I woke up not feeling good today. What's happening? It's not working. And it's like, no, because we're going to continually get triggered by things in life. But the trigger isn't happening out there. It's happening within us. Mm-hmm. We could talk more about that. And also, life continuously changes. So it isn't a one time like, oh, I took care of that. Now I should never have a challenge in my life again. Right? It's that because life is continuously changing, we have to have a certain level of fluidity and flexibility and agility that most people who are stuck in anxiety don't have. They're very rigid, they're fixed, they're black or white thinking. So it's like, no, let's learn to be a little bit more flexible and fluid. And that's what yoga is really about. Being in yoga psychology, a lot of people are like, what is that? Mm-hmm. Even I'm working with a mentor right now, and she's telling me to like really define that, because she goes, all I know of yoga is that it's these poses.
Yeah.
But yoga is teaching us to have a fluid and flexible mindset that can see ourselves in life more clearly and adapt to the ever-changing world so that we can have freedom.
Yeah. I was going to ask you to dig into to dig into defining what yoga psychology is. Cause I kept thinking that, like, I feel like people might want to know what yoga psychology is. And at the same time, like, I don't want to run out of time to talk about us.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
So if there was what you just shared, do you think that's a good snapshot? Is there a brief way to explain what yoga psychology is beyond what you just shared?
Yeah. I mean, let me just say it in this sentence.
Yeah.
Is that yoga means to link. Yoga means to connect. Yoga means to be immersed. And what yoga is teaching us is to come back home and connect and be re-immersed in our true nature. And so there are yoga postures, but that is not the whole of yoga. Mm-hmm. That's like one aspect. What yoga is is the practice of taking a mind that is scattered, anxious, or cannot focus, and training that mind to be able to see clearly inside and outside so that we have freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Clearly, I like that.
Yeah,
I was
it's called vidya. So we have a vidya, we have misperception, and that's why we suffer. Yoga says we suffer because we don't know who we really are and we
mm-hmm,
don't see life clearly.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I always think of too, like when I read Autobiography of a Yogi, which I loved.
Yeah.
And I probably should read it again. Um what at the time, and it was because I got out of it what I needed to get out of it. What really struck me was one of the things that we've already been talking about is that the power is mine.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
really in me. It's not in being able to levitate or do all these other things, right? It's
Mhm.
it's in whatever I want to put that focus to. You can do the most mind-blowing things. You have that power, but you have to believe in it. You have to be seated in it. You have to trust it. You have to know that that power is who you are.
Yeah, that's it. It's like yoga doesn't really even care. When I talk about the yoga, the ancient text of yoga, the complete psychology of yoga of Patanjali, it doesn't even really care about what happened to us before we come here or what happens to us when we die. So it's not religion. You can believe anything you want to believe. It's about how do we live this life with more skill and more freedom to be who we were born here to be.
Mm,
That's what
yeah,
it's about. Yeah.
yeah. It's not about the postures.
It's not about the postures are one aspect, and the
Yeah,
postures
sure.
are actually there to help us cultivate something called sthira and sukha, which is steadiness and ease. And what yoga tells us is if we can master these opposites on the mat, then we can master them in life because life is a whole series of contrast. I've
Mm,
got to be able to master contrast. I've got to be able to master the dark and the light, the up and the down, the pain and the joy. If I can do that on my mat, then maybe I can learn to do that in life. That's the point of a posture. It's not the point is not to be able to put your foot over your head,
right.
right?
Right. Do an inversion or
Mhm.
sometimes. And again, I think it's about that pulling it, like the yoga postures are an outward expression of an
Yeah.
internal process we're supposed to be learning and getting and clarifying.
Yes. Yes. And there's 8 limbs of yoga. We won't get into them on this one. Maybe we'll do another series
Yes.
on something.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's 8 limbs of yoga, 8 limbs, and the third limb are the postures. And in the Yoga Sutra, there's only 3 sutras on the postures, and there's 195 sutras total.
Mm-hmm.
So they are not the most important aspect, but in the West, it's what we become addicted to, meaning the postures, and they're
Yeah.
fine, but there's a whole bunch more, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. 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 I'm glad we got into that because I think
Yeah.
that's really important because you keep mentioning it. It's part of what you do. I think it's really important that people understand that yoga psychology is not around just learning how to do the postures. There's so much more. Let's we started and we've kind of woven this theme in and out around how the anxiety can really point back to the way, the places that you are disconnected from yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know that I can question something, like pose a question that helps.
Yeah.
That there's a good way for you to get into it. But can can you try and clarify, I guess, really what that means? Because
Yeah.
like we talked about the fear being part of that, and I think that is a good reference for people. But
Mhm.
what are the other sort of personal aspects that your anxiety might be pointing to about, you, about yourself and how connected you are or what you know about yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think, to give context to this great question, because it is a good question, is we get so used to suffering that we don't
Mm,
even realize we're suffering. Okay. Like suffering is not what we're here to do.
mm,
And so, suffering, anytime we are suffering, and this could be, I'm not sleeping through the night because I'm up worrying. This could be,
yeah.
I can't seem to have a great friendship because I'm so afraid of what people might leave me. I am stuck in a job that I don't love, but I'm afraid to change it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things that we're doing where we're not feeling connected to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, it doesn't mean we have to change all those things all at once, but the solution to start moving in the right direction in our life is to get connected to ourselves first, which means that we start to know ourselves, our own preferences, our own strengths. What brings me joy? What matters to me? What lights me up? What are my gifts? And it does tell us in the Yoga Sutra that when we start to get more in a state of yoga, not only do we reduce our suffering, but we also start to get to understand our gifts. We become more established in who we are. So when we are suffering, so we are out of alignment with ourselves. That's the first thing to know. It's not a
Mm.
punishment. It doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong, that we're bad people, that we're unlucky, that we're not deserving, that we got to hustle and work harder. That's not what that means. It means let me pause and really get clear and maybe get some support with it. Maybe we get in a community. Maybe we let's start listening to podcasts. We read a book. We talk to someone about how do I actually start to investigate who I am and what I really, really want. I can go deeper into that, but is that making sense?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And suffering, one thing I'll say about this is that when we are suffering, it's because also we usually are telling ourselves that we either can or can't do something until we get X, Y, and Z. So, like, well, I can't quit my job until X, Y, and Z, or I can't be happy until, or I can't have peace until, right? And so, as soon as we do that, we're creating the gap bigger. And I'm kind of spreading my hands apart
Mm-hmm.
because your true self, what I call your soul circle, your true self is always, when I say always, this is what I believe is what yoga teaches us, is always happy, joyous, and free, is always all knowing, is always at peace, is always at ease. I'm talking about your true, deep, eternal self that's our ground of being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I start to tell myself, when I start to believe thoughts that tell myself that I can't be happy until, or I used to have this thought, well, I grew up in an alcoholic home. Well, I had terrible parents. I had parents that never gave me a chance in life. So how can I be as good as anybody else? Or what if people find that out about me? They realize that I lived in this one bedroom apartment adjacent to a tavern with my mom who was never home. And I didn't get to graduate high school and I didn't get to go to college. And oh my God, like on a normal trend, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are they
Mm-hmm.
going to think of me? So now I can't do X, Y, and Z because that happened. That's a form of suffering. And I'm believing something that my mind is now thinking is true, but my inner being does not believe that's true. And because now I believe the thought and I'm not connected to my inner being, there's what's called separation from self, and that's suffering. I'm more linked to the lie that my mind is telling me than the truth of what my soul is doing, and that's suffering. So we have to close that gap by learning to turn our attention back in. And this is something we're talking about, but it's really experiential, right? We start to learn how to experience this. And one way, like I said, is simply to start to focus, get your mind to be able to stay on what you choose it to stay on.
Mm. Oh gosh, there's so much in there. Because I think the way that we've sort of normalized the idea of suffering is that we call it anxiety, right? And
Yes.
so, like, listening to you talk about it, I think that's really what's happening to people. There's this core true self that really is all the good, all the joy, all the love, like you said, all the peace, all the contentment. And then there's whatever it is that we feel that we're experiencing, and this separate place that we identify ourselves in. And that's why we have the anxiety, is because we don't recognize that we also at the same time have the other version. We get
Yes.
so separated and so removed from that connection between that and what it looks like on the outside world, that's where the anxious feeling comes from, or suffering, like you're calling. I mean, because some people it feels like suffering and they would say, oh no, my life is filled with suffering. And
Yeah.
then there's other people that are just like, I don't know, I'm just anxious all the time.
Yeah. That's it though. And you recap that beautifully, because that is it. And that truly is the core of my message, is like, when I say anxiety is a messenger, we made like this full circle of that's exactly what it's telling us. And we have been indoctrinated into suffering, that this is like this is how we're supposed to be living, and just kind of trying to survive it and get through it.
Mm-hmm.
No, like there are many things in my life that are the same as they've always been. I have the same mother. I have the same past that I
Right.
grew up
Right.
in, right? Like we can all look at this. But the thing that has changed is the way that I relate to myself, the way I relate to the anxiety when it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
What I call anxiety today, right, is feedback, is my messenger. Okay, here it is. Thank you. Thank you. Because we go unconscious so fast in our life, we get into a trance, we get habituated. We're just going along, kind of struggling. And all of a sudden we hit this bottom and go, oh, okay, I woke up again. Thank you. Thank you, anxiety. You woke me up again. Now what? Because the things that make us less anxious are not the things that are going to set us free. They're not the same things. And if all I'm
Mm-mm.
doing is hammering every piece of anxiety with every tool I have, and not actually learning to be free, I often tell people, if you've done all these things and you're still feeling very, very anxious, is it because you have never really asked yourself, how do I actually get free? Not how do I become less anxious? Very different questions and very different
Mm-hmm.
paths.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree 100%. I actually think that's a really great spot to stop. And what I really would like to do is invite people, how can they reach out to you if, very much as you just said, because I hear it, I see it, I know it to be true all the time. People say, this isn't working, nothing's been working, how come I don't feel better? I do all the stuff, right? I write the 3 things to be grateful for, and I do the vision boards, and I do the mantras, and I take the yoga class, right? Like there's all these things we've decided that are supposed to heal us and make us feel better, including talk therapy. I'm always like, there are other things we should be doing, not necessarily at the same time. Sometimes you stair step them, sometimes you do overlay it, but what can they be doing if they really very much find themselves in this place where nothing seems to be setting them free? How do they contact you? How can they work with you? Learn more about what you do with people.
Oh, well, they can go to my website, which is joystonecoaching.com. And on there, I have a book called If I'm So Spiritual, Why Am I Still So Anxious, which kind of tells this story and starts to introduce, you into these principles that I've started to practice in my own life and teach. So they
Okay.
can go there and grab part of that book for free. I have a workbook. They can DM me on Instagram. And I have a
What's your,
podcast.
I say,
So
what's your Instagram handle? What's your podcast?
my Instagram handle is at Joystone Coaching, and my podcast is the Joystone Podcast.
Okay. Well, that's
Very
all
easy.
very easy
Yeah.
then.
And
That,
just, yes, I would love to, because this is such an important topic. And I think the way that we're talking about this needs to be talked about more and
yeah.
shared more. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree 100%. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. I feel like there's so much good, juicy gold nuggets that came out of this. I love it.
Yay.
I can't thank you enough, everyone that has been listening today. If you really find yourself feeling extra stuck, extra pressure, all the things you've tried not working, please reach out to Joy. Sojourners, thank you for being on this journey with me together. Look forward to having you join us next week.